Hello, good afternoon. I can't see you, but I see the room is filling up. I appreciate you coming to this workshop. And this is a workshop that I've done for many years now, for about 5 years. And in the United States, it's a very popular workshop. And what it's about is about how to build a successful ArcGIS online organization. And there's no rules, there's no strict rules or regulations regarding that. What I'm going to show you are just some suggestions that may make it easier for you to succeed as you build your organization. I'll show you some examples. I've looked at some examples here in Czechia, and I'll show you some of those, and we can take a look at those together. This is a pretty fast-paced workshop, and I try to speak slowly so that you can understand, but I will be moving very quickly. I am hoping that what you get from this are just some ideas that you can take back and that you can implement on your own. And if there are some questions, feel free to wave your arm, and hopefully I will be able to see you, and I'll try to take some questions, maybe during, but also try to leave some time at the end. So with that, we shall begin. So your first step in lifting a successful organization is to establish the vision and who will govern your organization. And this is actually a pretty important process. A lot of times people kind of start, but they don't even know what their goals are. So thinking about what your portal is supposed to do, who it's supposed to serve, and what information and what applications you might need to create for that portal is an important first step. What I recommend is that you find a champion. I'm not sure if that translates, but someone that believes in the organization and will help lift it and will be the curator for the content in that organization. You should also identify the stakeholders. Who are the people that will be going to your organization to find maps and apps that they will be using? So these are the people that have an investment in what you do, and you want to communicate with them and understand what their needs are. So once you identify the stakeholders and the curators, you can discover what they need and begin assembling and building what needs to be assembled. So in other words, think about the deliverables. What is it that you need to create? Is it story maps? Is it maps? Is it layers? Usually it's a combination of almost everything. And then you also need to think about the workflows that this organization will support. Is it field data collection? Is it analysis? Is it using insights? Things like that. So you need to think about this in advance. I find that the successful organization has a central person or two or three that manage the organization, that know ArcGIS Online, and are the people that govern and control and oversee what's going there. We also recommend that as you work with people that will be using your site, that you meet early and often and think about what you want the site to be. So these are the steps. Communicate with others early, often, and well. Establish expectations so that people know when to expect that that map will be ready or those apps will be ready. You can always prototype and test before you make those things available. And the patterns that you find successful, and everybody will have different success patterns, those are the ones that you are going to want to adopt and roll out. But above all, I think that if you're just beginning an ArcGIS organization, there's a lot to learn. And you won't know what you don't know until you don't know it. So you'll learn on the way and just adapt and be flexible and evolve the organization as time goes on. Second thing you need to think about if you're just beginning is what is your implementation pattern? In other words, what's the foundation of your online GIS? Now, many of you already have ArcGIS desktop and are using ArcMap. I know some of you are using ArcGIS Server. So your first step into WebGIS then will be ArcGIS Online. You're going to build an ArcGIS Online organization in the cloud. And I've looked at some examples here in the Czech Republic, and I see that at least a number of you have already done that. Another possible way that you can implement your portal is by using ArcGIS Enterprise. So this is not for everybody. It's a little more difficult because you have to take the software, you have to install it and maintain it on your own hardware. So if you have a strong IT department, maybe this is something they can do. You can ask the folks at ARCDATA to help you implement this and design your architecture. So there is help available and there are ways that you can do that. But this is the difference. You can implement it in the cloud or implement it on premises. It's much easier to do it in the cloud, and you can always move on premises if you really need to. Why would you want to go on premises? Some of that might involve data security. You need to keep things behind your firewall. But the cloud is secure as well. So we meet all of our government security compliance requirements for cloud-based technology. So the cloud is secure too. So maybe that's not so much an issue. What might be advantageous to implement on your own hardware is if you need to integrate with other business systems. So if you're using SAP or using other technologies, it's easier to integrate those on your own infrastructure if those things are already there than it is in the cloud. So just a few things to think about. But even if you implement enterprise, you're still going to want to connect to the public cloud because that's where you'll find other content, other maps, other apps, and of course that's where you can leverage the Living Atlas for your base maps and other layers that you might use. As your organization grows, what we find in the United States is that many people actually end up implementing both. And these are typically larger organizations. They have both a portal on their own infrastructure, but they also leverage the cloud for some of their activities and some of their content. And there are tools that allow you to transfer layers, do backups and things like that back and forth between the cloud and your own infrastructure, but I consider this more of an advanced architecture, and I think it's easiest, certainly if you're just beginning, to start with ArcGIS Online in the cloud. Now, there are different data stores. When you are using the cloud, you are sharing space in the cloud with others. If you have specific needs and requirements for high throughput, you can get what's called a premium data store. And what this means is you have your own virtual container in the cloud. You're not sharing that space with other users. I don't know that this applies so much here. Even in the United States, only the very largest agencies like FEMA or some of the defense agencies are interested in this, but it's something that you might consider. I think I've already discussed about the options between enterprise and the cloud is just the easiest way to do that. Okay, the next part is about creating a great destination. So your homepage, especially if it's public and even if it's not, represents you as a GIS organization. So how people perceive you will depend on how nice things look. If you have a homepage that isn't well crafted, that doesn't provide a good experience when people click on a map or an app, then they will begin to have doubts about the rest of the content that you have, and perhaps even you as an organization. So this is a reflection of you, of your GIS capabilities and your GIS expertise. So I always recommend that you spend a little bit of time and make a really nice destination, a really nice place that people get a very good impression of you from the very beginning. And here's just a couple of examples here. This one on the left is a Canadian site, the city of Victoria, and you can see it's a very pleasing look. It looks like it's well crafted and well designed. Here's another one from a Department of Transportation. What I like about this site is you see they have a little logo here on their thumbnails. They're using some branding, and I'll talk about that in just a moment, but I like what they've done using that. It establishes their content as something that can be easily identified, as well as something that makes people understand it's from the authoritative source. Here's also a couple of other examples. The Houston site, they've styled their page using an HTML table, so you can look at that site and see the little table, and there's options that take you other places. The Oregon one is actually highly styled. So a lot of the home pages that you begin with are pretty simple. You can do some interesting things by using some CSS overrides and some styles here. Here's another couple of examples. The city of Boston, on the right-hand side, they made their home page look like their home website. So they adopted the same color scheme and they adopted the same style. You'll also notice some subtle differences here. If you go to these other sites, let's go back up to here, you'll see that even little things like the corners here are rounded by default. And the city of Boston wanted to have more of a modern flat look. So they removed the rounding on the corners there and made everything look flat. This one in the upper left is a site that I helped build, and it uses sort of more of an immersive graphic on the back end to provide a more interesting look and feel. The idea is you want to present a really good first impression, and that includes an appealing design, a featured gallery with branding. We'll talk more about branding, but a way to immediately identify that the content is from your organization. Featured links and other resources. This Minneapolis site has a table with some icons and links that lead people to other important information or other resources that they'll use, which could be links to the city's website, could be links to the city's open data site, and other things like that. So those are some interesting things that you can consider. Let's take a look at that site. So what's your first impression of this? My first impression is that this is actually quite a nice site. They have some featured apps on the homepage here, and they're using branding. You can see the City of Minneapolis logo is a little sailing ship, and all of the thumbnails there have used that in their thumbnail. So I think that's a good idea and a good example of some branding. The other thing that you want to make sure is, since this is a public site, if people click on something, you want them to have a good experience. So let's see how the experience is here. They're using one of our configurable apps to present some information about the city, and it looks like this is when the streets will be cleaned within the city. So people that live in the city can use this app. It's an easy app for them to use, and they can figure out when their streets might be clean. So this is a good example of providing some good information products here that people can use. We just had an election in the United States yesterday, or was it the day before? Tuesday. And so here was an app that they had built to help people find out where they go vote. So timely apps that deal with current topics or what people need to know or do would be good candidates for you to put on your gallery ribbon page here. As we move down on the site, we have some resources. And this is constructed using an HTML table. I'll show you where you can do this. If you know a little bit of HTML or a little bit of CSS, you can do some very interesting things with your homepage. It's not completely stylable like a website is, Most of that is for security reasons, but it is highly stylable in some interesting ways, and here they've implemented a table. What this does is it leverages some other resources. So if I click Create a Map, what it does is it uses some of the resources that Esri has provided. People can watch a video about how to create a map in ArcGIS Online, and they can find out how to add content. So there's different things that you can leverage to put on the site. What I also like about this site is they include buttons to their main website. So I can easily find the City of Minneapolis main website. You'll notice something here about this web page. They've taken that gallery that appeared on their home page at the top here, and they've embedded that into their city web site. So this is very easy to do. We actually generate the HTML, the embed code, for you to add this to your website directly. So it's easy to do, and this is a good example, I think, of cross-pollination between the website and their ArcGIS Online homepage. The other thing that I like that they've done is they've also linked to their open data site. And open data you can think of as a configurable application within your organization. You take some of your data, you put it into groups, and you nominate the group for participation in the open data site. And you can design your open data site, but this is a good way to make information more publicly available. So this is about government transparency, and providing information to the public are very large topics in the US. But there's a good reason for anyone to think to use an open data site so that this can be used by others, could be used by people building applications, can actually be used by the public. They can make their own maps and do things like that. So this open data is something that I recommend you consider as well. So that's the City of Minneapolis site. Let's take a look at a couple of other ones. All right, so I mentioned the Crowther lab as an organization. You can see this has a completely different look and feel. And what I've done is I've used some CSS overrides to do things like change the underline color here and change the color of the title bar. I've also added a large graphic in the background to kind of fill up the space. So rather than, let's take a look at an example here. Rather than have, in this case, we have a lot of white space. This is a kind of a more immersive experience, and this is done by using a little markup, a little HTML. Let me show you where that is done, and I'm going to go to my personal group, and I'll show you where I've added that. So if I go to my organization, you can see I've changed the colors here, I've changed the underbar, I've added a different graphic and done some other things here. So if I go as an admin to my organization and go to settings, the settings page is where we control everything about our organization. Everything from the default base maps to the apps that are available, the configurable apps to how the home page looks. And what I've done, let me just copy and paste this so we could see it. It looks like a lot of work, but it's actually not so much. And I spoke to Radek, and I'm going to make this available to you so that you can look at this. This is just some CSS styling. So I've done things like changed some of the colors, and I've added a background graphic that's static and things like that. Again, if you know a little bit of CSS or HTML, you can do some very interesting things with your website, with your homepage. And like I said, I'll share this with the team here at ARCDATA, and you can ask them about it and make that available. Let's take a look at maybe another example from here in Czechia. So I like this site. This is appealing to me. It has a nice graphic. I like that they're using branding here. So this logo, if I look for content and I see a thumbnail with this logo, I don't even have to read anything. I recognize that right away, and I can identify that as an authoritative source. Now, the one thing I don't like about this site, if I can be a little bit picky, is that there's an empty space here. So in the United States, I say I'm a Virgo, and Virgo, not that I believe in astrology, but Virgos are supposed to pay attention to detail, and scrutinize every little thing, and that's certainly me. So if I was judging this site, I would say, they need to add at least one more thing to their gallery here because this open space here disturbs me. So I'd like to see that completed. Let's look at their gallery and see what they've done there. And again, they've done a nice job with their thumbnails. They're using their logo throughout, and that helps you identify their content when you search for it. And it also makes it look to me that this is a professional organization that's well organized and curates their content very well. So again, these are first impressions that we get from these organizations. Does anybody have any questions about this at this moment? No questions, okay. We shall continue on there. Something that I recommend that I wish we did automatically, but I think is a good practice, is your home page can be added as an item. You can add it as a document item, and that makes your home page discoverable in ArcGIS Online. Why not? And also what you want to do is when you're crafting your site, think about all of the different parts of the page. You have tabs across the top. You want to make sure that the gallery looks good. You can control what appears in the gallery, and you want to make sure that the experience for everything someone might encounter there is a good experience. All of this, as I showed you, is done through the organization settings. So an administrator or someone with admin privileges can edit any of those settings, and these control everything from the default base maps to the look and feel of the site, security settings, utility services. So in other words, if you have your own geocoding service that you want to use in place of the default ArcGIS Online or Living Atlas geocoder, you can insert that service, and then all of your web maps will use your own geocoding service. So there's lots of different ways that you can customize your site. Now, the other day at the keynote, I talked a little bit about vector base maps. And vector base maps, I think, are important. And actually, for us at Esri, they're much better than tiles because to create tiles, you have to, there's a lot of work to do that. And then when you update them, all the tiles have to be updated. The vector base maps are interesting because on the back end, they're vectors, and they're translated into vector tiles on the fly, and it's easier for us to maintain those. We've been working quite a bit on those vector tiles, and one thing you might want to think about as you set up your organization is whether to use the raster tile base maps or the vector tile base maps. And where that is set is the administrator under settings can go to the map tab, and here is where you can choose to use, by default it's still the raster tiles, but if you check this box, you can choose the Esri vector base maps instead, or what I like to do is I build a custom base map gallery and I add a little bit of both because I still like a lot of the raster tile base maps, and I don't use all of the vector tile base maps. Plus there's even some custom ones that I like. So I'll build a custom base map gallery, and the way that's done is you create a group, and as I scan through here, I like to use visual cues, so I don't like to have to do a lot of reading. So I use colors to help me identify which groups are meant for what purpose in my organization. It's just easier for me. I don't have to do a lot of reading. So right away, here is a group. It's called my Online Labs Custom Basemap Gallery. What I've done is I've created actually that's not the one I'm using. The one I'm using, that one's empty. The one I'm using is this one, the raster and vector base maps combined. So I combined both together, put them into a group, and once I've done that, in my organization settings, in the map tab is where I chose that group. So now that group becomes my base map gallery. So anybody in my organization that's making maps is going to see those base maps instead of the default Esri base maps. And you can do this with your own custom base maps. The interesting thing about a base map is it can be in an entirely different projection than the default one. So by default, everything is Web Mercator Auxiliary Sphere. Why is that? Well, a long time ago, Google and Bing established that as the default projection for mapping. But I know here in the Czech Republic, you have your own standards, and you can create base maps that use your local projection. And then when you put those in the gallery, everything that gets added to those base maps will be in that projection, and it'll be projected on the fly, if so. So there's lots you can do with your base maps and with customizing things like this. All right. Looks like I lost my place here in the PowerPoint, so pardon me while I catch up. All right, so here's where we were. Okay, so you just check that box in the Map tab to change to your custom gallery or use the Esri vector ones. And I like to make my own custom gallery. Groups are a building block for organizing people in your organization, as well as building blocks for your organization as well. So I've already shown you how we can create a group full of base maps, and I can use that group to change my default base map gallery. So groups are building blocks for lots of things in the ArcGIS online organization. This example we already looked at. This is that Boston map site. I like this. This is a very clean, very modern looking design. So that's a good example of what you can do with your home page, and a little bit of an idea about how it can be customized. Any questions so far? No questions. We shall continue. All right, the next step is about establishing a brand, and I really encourage people to think to do this. It takes a little bit of work and effort, and it takes a little bit of thinking and designing, but I think that it's of great value. So a brand, of course, is an easily identified symbol. A logo, perhaps. So look at the logos on the board over there. Those are brands. People look at that, and they already can know who the company is just because of the visual, consistent representation for that brand. And I recommend this within an organization. This is the Kansas Department of Transportation, and you can see on all their thumbnails they're using their logo. I think this is really nice, and it makes it easy to find that content. Here's another example. The city of Greenville, South Carolina, uses their big G logo on everything. It makes it easy to find and identify. This is an older logo, actually, from the city of Washington, D.C. There's the B logo for the city of Boston. And there's other kind of styles you can use, like California Department of Fish and Wildlife uses the California bear. That's the state animal. And they couple that with colors to create their own little branding. Another very important thing that I recommend that you do is that you take one of your profiles in your organization and you make that the profile which represents the entire organization. So let me say that another way so it's a little easier to understand. When you log into the organization, your name appears on all your content. So when I publish things by default, my name appears as Bern Szukalski. But what I recommend to organizations to think to do is to take one of their users and make that the public profile for all of your best public content. So in this case, Montana State Library is the organization. When they publish their best content, it's not published by the individual username. It's transferred to this user, and all of their authoritative public content appears under this username. I think that's a good practice. Also, what you want to make sure is that the profile is visible, and by default, unfortunately, it's not, so you have to actually change a little setting. But the profile should be visible, and you should also add some information. So when I find items in ArcGIS Online, and I find an item from the user on the left, that doesn't increase my confidence that it's authoritative or well-curated data. If I see a user profile like the one on the right, I have more confidence, and I can identify that as authoritative data. So here's another example. This is back to the city of Minneapolis. So what they've done is all their top-tier content, they transfer to a profile called City of Minneapolis. And when you click on that, you see a nice profile card that has the city logo and also provides contact information, and it could even provide links and things like that. So this is what I think is a very good practice, and one that I recommend that you think about. So if we kind of put these ideas together, let's take a look at some examples here. So these are thumbnails that are well branded, and they've done what I've just talked about. They've assigned that content to an owner that represents, a profile that represents the entire organization. So let's take a look. So here I am in ArcGIS Online, and I've searched for content from this organization. It's from the state of Utah, and it's called SITLA. That's the name of the organization. Now, as I look at the content, I can immediately identify their content because they've used consistent thumbnail branding. They've used that, and their content has been assigned to this Utah SITLA owner, so I can recognize that as authoritative content, and they have a nice profile card. So already I have a lot of confidence in the content that I find. I can find it really easily, and I can also kind of click on their items and see other stuff that they've published. This, I think, is a very good practice. It certainly is a much better experience than if I just type in Utah, what do I see here? Okay, so far this looks pretty good, but this one, the thumbnail doesn't even look good. Do I trust that? I'm not sure. Who is it? They haven't even told me who they are. I have no idea who this person is. Is this an experiment, or is this authoritative content? I really don't know. I'm not sure. But if I find content that seems to be well branded, like the Utah SITLA content that we just looked at, or something like this, immediately my eye recognizes that as something that is special and is well curated. Something like this, I would stay away from and wouldn't trust. So you make a lot of judgments visually, so putting a little bit of extra time into how things appear, I think is a very good practice. Now, actually a few releases ago, we added the ability for you to specify an organization color scheme. And this is in your organization settings. So if your color scheme is red and black, you can kind of specify that, and then by default, all of your configurable apps will adopt that color scheme. Not many people use this, but it's an interesting thing that you might find useful. Questions so far? No questions. All right. All right. Next step is you've got an organization, you have it looking nice, you have an idea about how you're going to organize it. What you want to do is take existing content that you have and turn it into information building blocks. Because one of your goals in your ArcGIS organization is that you, the GIS staff, you're not going to be making all the maps. You're going to be empowering other people to do self-service mapping, to make their own maps and make their own apps. And to do that, you need to make the building blocks, the layers, that you want them to use to make their own maps. So that's what this section is about. So as you add things to your organization, there's lots of different types of content that you can add. There's map documents and tools. You can add spreadsheets and things like that. You can see here in these thumbnails, I've actually used some visual cues that help people understand what that content is. So, pardon me, obviously in the right-hand side, that's going to be a PowerPoint document. People can tell right away. And on the left-hand side, you can tell that's going to be a spreadsheet. So you can use thumbnails and some visual cues to help people find content in your organization. Now, those of you that use ArcGIS Server, your first step is going to be to take those services that you've already published and register them in your ArcGIS Online organization. This doesn't mean that you're changing the location of the data or where the services come from, but you're just registering those services in your ArcGIS Online organization. And what you might think to do is you might want to think to reorganize them a little bit so that they make better building blocks. On the left is an example of a service coming from a services directory that has lots and lots of layers and sublayers. And everything's just sort of in one big list. And that makes it very difficult for someone to make a map if all they want to do is show maybe bicycle lanes. They have to look at this big long list and then check the sublayer that they want to display. So in the modern world of web maps, we think about making granular building blocks that are maybe they only have one layer or a couple of sublayers, but really no more than that. This just makes it easier for people to assemble. So from that large list of services on the left, what we might think to do is break that down into several more granular services so that they're more focused on specific themed content. There's lots of different ways that services can be published. I don't have time to go into all of these, but there are things to think about as you create your data and begin publishing it in the ArcGIS Online environment. So in ArcGIS Online, it's feature layers and also raster tile layers. Those are the two types of layers that you can publish directly in ArcGIS Online right now. If you're using ArcGIS Server, or ArcGIS Enterprise, which includes Server, then you have some other options. So there's lots of different service types, and just something to keep in mind as you begin adding these. Something new that we added that I think is very powerful is the notion of a view. And a view is similar to the same concept in databases. It takes a large thing and it kind of focuses your attention onto a portion of that. So for example, we might create a view of a larger complete data set to hide some information from maybe public users. So you can create a view which privatizes some of those attributes. Or you can make a view from a larger collection that focuses on a certain district or city or area. So it's kind of a live filter onto that. I'm just mentioning this because this is pretty new. This is probably 4 releases ago, earlier in the year. But it's a very powerful concept. So just kind of put this in the back of your mind. There's blog posts and help topics which will help you learn more about these and uncover some of those things. When you add a layer into ArcGIS Online, you can refine its appearance. You use smart mapping to make a better representation. But beyond that, you can also think about transparency or scale dependencies or doing things like adding labels. So these are all part of the layer properties. And the other thing that you need to think about is the pop-up experience. So by default, it's just a list of attributes. But you want to turn that list into something more meaningful, a nice presentation of the data rather than just a dump of attributes. And this is very easy to do in an ArcGIS online web map, and there are some examples there that include charts and some interesting graphics, pictures, and things like that. So I always cringe when I see an configured pop-up because it's so easy to make it so much better and get rid of all those GIS fields that nobody knows what to do with anyway, like object ID and FID. All those things are meaningless to the people that will be using the data. So hide them, get rid of them. You can also format text or numbers. So you can decide the 1,000 separator or whatever you want to add there. So you can format the display of your items as well. Now, as you're building layers, adding them to ArcGIS Online, you're doing a lot of work. You're using a lot of tradecraft to make that presentation of information more interesting. You don't want to have to teach everybody how to do that. You've done it once. You just want other people to use that layer. So what you do is you click Save Layer. So the owner of the item, when they finish configuring that layer, open up the More Options and look for Save Layer, and that saves all the work that you've done. Let me show you a quick example of that, since I think many of you might be at a place where you're beginning to add some things from your server, perhaps. So let's go to my content. So this is in my organization here, and I'm going to open up a services directory. Okay, so my typing was good. This is one of the services directories from the Living Atlas. So a service directory is created automatically when you publish something through ArcGIS Server. And I'm going to open up one of these folders, and let's look at the diversity index. Diversity is a map or a layer that can show the different ethnicities in the population. So my step, as I want to add this to my organization so people can use it, and this is how to do that. I'm going to just copy that, so Control-C, come up here to my content and say Add an Item, and I'm adding an item from the web. And I'll just, by default, it's an ArcGIS Server web service. I'll just go ahead and paste that in there, and it automatically picks up all the tags, and it comes up with a title, and it's picked that up from the services directory. So if you've done some homework on the back end, all this just kind of carries further. Now, I'm just going to title this a little bit differently. So here's diversity index, and I go ahead and add the item. So I've taken my service from my server, and I've registered it now in ArcGIS Online as an item. It's pulled over the description. It's tried to make a good thumbnail for me. That one looks pretty good. And now I'm ready to go and see what the user experience is like in the map viewer. So here it is. Let's go to where I am in California, and here's San Bernardino County. And first thing that happens is when I click on it, nothing happens. Well, why is that? Well, because what I need to do is I need to enable the pop-up. Okay, so now I've done that, and now when I click on it, I just get a bunch of information. It's a little difficult to understand, but I can make that more meaningful, and the way that I make that more meaningful is by configuring the pop-up. So here, anything in curly braces is the attribute, the contents of a field attribute, and I have some choices here. I can display a description from one field, a custom attribute display, no attributes, things like that. Let's do a custom one. This one I find particularly interesting because you can combine regular text. So let's just say the name of the county here is, And let's put a little colon there. And then I choose the drop down here, and I choose the county name. And actually, let's make that a little larger. Make it extra large. And I can even do things like change colors. So if I select that, let's make that a nice blue color. All right, let's see what we have so far. So I click OK. And now my pop-up has some regular text as well as combining attributes. So I've already made the pop-up a little bit better. But there's lots of other things, of course, that we can do here. Let's open this up again. Let's configure the pop-up, and let's go ahead and add a pie chart. This has some demographic information, and I'm not going to do this so carefully. I'm just going to click on a couple of these very quickly just to show you how this works. And we click OK. And there we go. Now I have some text, and I also have a nice little pie chart which displays some information. So this is really easy to do, but I don't want the next person that needs to use this layer to do it. So what I'm going to do is come up here and click Save Layer. So all of the tradecraft, all of the authoring I've done on this layer is now preserved, and the next person that uses this layer already has a configured pop-up and a nice presentation of information. Now, they can override this if they like, but I've given them something that's ready to use. So this is a very important step in making content for your users to use that helps them make their own maps. All right, so that was Save Layer. And again, I recommend that you don't share unconfigured layers. Configure them, put a little effort into them, make them look nice, and think of them as building blocks that others will use. Now, maps, of course, combine layers, and smart mapping helps us design our layers or render our layers in nice ways, and that all kind of comes together through a web map. And one thing that you need to check when you build a web map is that the layers behave the way that you want. When I look for layers that have no transparency, or let me phrase that a different way. When I'm looking for layers or looking to build layers as building blocks for others to use, I won't use transparency. I won't use scale. I want the map author to have full control over all of that. So when I'm making my maps, I'm always looking for the layers that give me everything. Maybe they have a nice pop-up, maybe they have an initial color scheme, but in the context of a map, I might want to adjust the transparency and might also want to adjust the scale. So that's what I prefer. What you prefer and what is best for your organization is a decision that you make. But how the layers work together in a map is another consideration when you're making building blocks. Now, I've deleted lots of things accidentally that I wished I had not, that have broken maps and apps. And a way to prevent this from happening is there's a little delete protection toggle which is in the settings for an item that you own. So in the item settings, you check the box to prevent it from being accidentally deleted. You can't delete it unless you uncheck that box and save it again. So that's a good way to prevent layers from disappearing, pardon me, that power apps. Another thing that I like to see is metadata, information about the items. And this is actually a pretty good example. It has a nice title, which already tells me what the layer is about. It's got a nice little summary description, and it has a longer, more detailed description, which helps me figure things out. It has a good thumbnail, again, that great description. It has a nice, concise summary. This is a well-documented layer, and anybody can go in here and learn more about it and figure out what it's good for and how it might be used. On top of that, you might want to add some tags. We've introduced something new called categories recently, which you can implement across your organization. I like categories much better than tags. And we'll talk about those in a minute. Now, when it comes to thumbnails, I see thumbnails like this all the time, which lend me no confidence about the quality of the data there. The thumbnails are terrible. They look like the dog's breakfast. I don't know how that translates here, but you know, obviously someone hasn't taken the time to craft a good thumbnail, right? There's the dog's breakfast. And the thumbnails, of course, that we like to see are ones that help people identify it as authoritative or help people identify the content. So there's different kind of methods that you can adopt. There's location hints, right? And you can look at this second one and immediately recognize that it's going to have data from Hawaii, or this is coming from Australia, from Melbourne. There's graphic hints, right? So obviously the one on the far right might be about wineries or wine. These are pretty obvious. Content hints, you can add little logos to indicate what type of data it is or file, and then of course you can combine that with your branding that you've been thinking about for your organization. So all these are much better representations of content than this. So I always look for things like this, which indicate to me that it's authoritative and that it's well curated. Now, when you edit, this takes some work, right? And you don't necessarily want to do this for all of your items, but for your best ones, your ones that your organization is most proud of or responsible for, it's worth your while to create some better items. I do all of mine in Photoshop because I have the luxury of having Photoshop through Esri, but you can use any graphic software to do this. I have layers with standard icons and things like that. I'll just take a little screen capture and drop it in there and make my own thumbnails. And there's some free tools available and some third-party tools from people like GeoJob, one of our business partners. They've made a thumbnail authoring tool inside of their product too. So there's lots of different options for you. Now, what I like to also add to a lot of my items is boilerplate text. And this might be just some text that gets added to all my key items that explain the source, explain who I am as an organization, and things like that. It's also something that you can do. It does take a bit of work right now because you have to add this by hand to your items. We'll be hosting Python in the ArcGIS Online Cloud very soon, and there'll be a way to automate this using a Python script. You can do it using Python scripts now in the environment that gets installed with ArcGIS Pro. So there's ways to automate this, and we'll be improving this automation, but for right now it's something that you have to basically do by hand, so it's a little bit of an extra chore, an administrative task. A few releases ago, we added what's called an item completeness guide. And what it does is it looks at your item details and it kind of gives you a score. It's not really a number score, it's just a little gauge. And it has some suggestions about what you might do to complete or make that item description a little bit better. So here, let's see, it says I can add a thumbnail, add a title. That's already been done, but I might think to do these other things here. So these are just little hints that help me improve the quality of my item and how I've described it. If you are, and I hope you are, thinking about contributing to the Living Atlas, which is what Silva talked about yesterday, we also look at your item details and expect that you have completed them to at least a certain level. So this is just a good practice, not only for your organization, but also if you're thinking to contribute to the Living Atlas. Any questions? All right, so let's talk about organizing your organization. And the main construct for organization within your organization is a group. And they're really a framework for lots of things, as I mentioned earlier. Groups can also allow you to control access to certain pieces of information. So you can restrict access to certain maps or layers or apps by adding people to a group and limiting their access to only whatever appears in that group. That's one level of access. You can share things across the organization and also publicly, but you can also constrain it to a group. So it's a good way to organize not only content for people to use, but also restrict content from becoming widely discoverable if that's what you need. A lot of organizations, as they're beginning to lift ArcGIS online, actually start with an organizational chart. They look at other departments in their organization and they'll create a group that they know that they will want people from that other department to come look at and find some interesting maps and apps that they can use. So you can use an organizational chart, you can think about current projects that you have going on. Those are good ways to begin organizing your organization and thinking about the groups you might want to have. Another way is through our solution templates. So at the Esri.com site, if you look for solutions, there's solutions for local government, for utilities. You can download the solution package, and in that are also some guidelines and suggestions about the groups that you might want to create, as well as even group logos you might want to use. I don't like those so much. I kind of like the more basic ones. Those to me are a little bit too much for me to look at. I like kind of plain colors that just help me visualize what's going on. So this is what I like to do. I use color to help me identify what groups in my organization are intended for what purpose. And I find this just makes it easier for me as an administrator. I don't have to read titles to figure out what that group is meant to do. I just look at a color and I understand, oh, that's one of the groups that is used in my organization as the home gallery or the home gallery ribbon. That's a building block for my organization. Or I can look at a color or maybe a little bit of a design and say, oh, okay, those are the groups that I've built to support other departments in my organization. So I find these visual cues really helpful, and it helps keep life sane, especially as your organization and its activities grow. An important thing, though, is you never want to invite somebody into a group and have them experience emptiness, right? It's like you get invited to a party and you walk in the door and nobody's there. What you want is you want to open up that door and find, wow, interesting people and food and all that great stuff, right? And it's the same thing with a group. You want to pre-populate it with content that's useful to whoever is going to be in that group, and you want to make sure that their experience with all that is good. And again, this builds on some of the concepts that we've talked about earlier. Now, in your organization, you can mark content as authoritative or deprecated. So this is very useful to help people in your organization find the very best content. We implemented this, I think, 2 releases ago, maybe 3. But within your organization, you can take your best content and say, this is authoritative. And what happens is you get a little green logo that says authoritative, actually part of the item. And it's very easy then for people to find it. They can also filter by status and look for authoritative content. Deprecated means that, all right, this is older stuff and we're going to be getting rid of it soon. If you're using this in your map, heads up, you know, you're going to want to update and move up to the authoritative content. So rather than just delete it and maybe risk breaking some maps and apps, you can mark it as deprecated so that people no longer will be using that content, and then over time you can just remove those items. I've got a little link here. Let's see what I might have wanted to demonstrate here. All right, so here's some examples where this is actually in the public ArcGIS Online. I see that here the state of Iowa has marked some content as deprecated. So this helps me stay away from it. They didn't want to delete it because some people might still be using it in their maps and apps, but they've also marked it as deprecated. So I know that I need to look for the updated version of that. So again, these are nice ways to help discover content. And as you search for that in the status here. And here I've clicked the authoritative. So again, I'm seeing the authoritative badge here. And I'm also seeing this nice little logo, which also helps me identify that that's authoritative content. So these are good visual cues and good things to think about. Groups can be private, they can be public. You can constrict members to kind of living and experiencing things only within a particular group. So there's lots of different group settings. You can control who contributes content, who can edit content. Groups are also collaboration nodes between organizations. So I can create a group in my organization, and I can invite people from another organization to participate in that group. So this is how you can kind of share content, not at a public level, but at a private level from one organization to another. So they're also very useful as collaboration nodes. Groups, like items, also have delete protection. So if you want to make sure that you don't get rid of it accidentally, set the delete protection. Your next step then is going to be adding items to your group, and we do that by sharing an item in a group. So you click the share button, and then you can select from any of the groups that you own and move content into that group. That's how you populate items in a group. There are different categories that you can now create in your organization. This is pretty new. I really like categories, but it does take a while for you to think about what they might be. We've established some template categories. So we use categories in the Living Atlas. You can adopt our categories. Or there's ISO or European Inspire categories, or you create custom ones. I like the custom ones, and you can create combinations of both. So say, for example, in Redlands, there's a street improvement project to improve New York Street. That's the street that Esri's on. So as a member of the city, I might create a category called New York Street Improvement. And I can assign that category to certain items. And what that means then is other people in my organization, if they're working on that New York Street Improvement project, they can search for that category and see a list of all the items which have been categorized under that category. So it's a really handy way to organize content in your organization, but it does take a little bit of thought. You need to think about what the categories might be. I don't like tags. Why don't I like tags? Tags are overused, basically. Esri in ArcGIS Online, we don't give you good tag editors. So if a tag is misspelled, you have to hunt it down on your own and correct the spelling. There are some tools on GitHub. There's something called the ArcGIS Online Swiss Army knife, kind of a do-all kind of set of tools. And if you Google that, you'll actually find it. It's technically not supported, but lots of people use it. But that has some tag management capabilities. But otherwise, you're on your own with tags. The other thing I don't like about tags is when you perform analysis, Esri will automatically put some tags in there. Or when you make a story map, Esri will automatically add some tags for story maps. As an admin, I don't like that. I don't like people messing with my tags, but Esri messes with your tags. So I like categories because I own them. I have some great tools to create them, to look at them, and to manage them. And tags are like, I don't really bother so much with them. So tags do influence search, but I think in terms of organizing content and making it more discoverable, categories are the more powerful and better way to go. So you create your own categories and people can search for them. And as I mentioned, I recommend thinking about building custom ones. Something new in ArcGIS Enterprise, which will be coming to ArcGIS Online probably in February, but it's not there just yet. But in Enterprise, you can create what's called an enterprise site. And what this is sort of a destination for certain members of your organization. So maybe the police department, rather than log in and experience the generic framework for looking at stuff, you can direct them to a specific site which might have some apps that they can use or might have some layers that they can use. In other words, it's more focused to who they are and what they might need to do. Again, this is available in ArcGIS Enterprise now. It was just introduced last release, and it's coming to ArcGIS Online very soon. All right. Maps, of course, are the cornerstone of everything that we do, but apps are what really complete the user experience. And there's lots of configurable apps that will make you a hero. They're very powerful. This is a dashboard. This map is being used in the dashboard. The dashboard has widgets which you can wire up. As content updates in the map, you can control what happens in the widgets and vice versa. So Operations Dashboard is a very powerful configurable app. And there's other configurable apps as well. There's story maps, and there's Web App Builder, jet lag. Web App Builder is another way to build apps. So there's lots of these that you can choose from. So the idea is that you can take a map and you can use it in lots of different ways by putting it in lots of different apps with different tools. So here's an example. Map Viewer, I prefer to use as just an authoring tool. And I author a map using the Map Viewer, but then when I want other people to use that map, I will give it to them in the context of an application. Let's take a quick look at that for a sec here. So let's go to my portal. So Online Labs, and I'm just going to pick a map that I have at random. And hopefully it'll be a really nice looking map. Let's see what we got. All right, let's try this one. Albuquerque bike paths. So let's open up this map in the Map Viewer. Now, if I want to share this with someone, one way I can do it is just click Share, and it's a public map, and I can just kind of share them that link. And this button here will preserve the current map extent. I picked a bad map. One of the settings, this is actually a good topic though, one of the settings in your organization is whether to enforce HTTPS or not. This is an older map, and this map actually uses mixed content, so both secure and non-secure services and things like that. So that actually is why it complained, because my organization enforces HTTPS. And that's something I do recommend that you do, but again, if you're using mixed content, then there might be some issues there. Okay, so here's a quick map, and this looks like it's a super duper simple map. And I want to share this with someone. I can click Share, and again, I can just kind of copy and paste this and send that to them, but I can do some other things. Once I share a map, I can create a web app and showcase a map or apps that just focus on the map itself rather than add a lot of other tools. So one thing I can do is, a minimalist is actually one of my favorites. I can preview it, and I can just copy this link now and I can email it to someone. So they get a little better experience rather than look at something that they might find confusing because there's some other tools here and you know, some other things that might distract them. I can just share my map in one of the configurable apps using the preview. I call this a quick share, and that's one way to do it. The other way to do this, of course, is to, when you share the map, go ahead and configure it completely. So pick the category that you want, select it, click Create a Web App, give it a new title, and then you open up the configuration panel for this configurable app. And you know, the way that you configure these or build these apps is different, whether you're using Web App Builder or Story Maps, or in this case, one of the configurable HTML apps. But they're different but yet similar. So here I can choose some options. I can control a color scheme here, things like that. In this case, once I've done some changes, I can click Save, and here I just changed it to a little dark color scheme. This one doesn't offer me too many different options, but they're all a little bit different, but they all kind of work the same way. So that's configurable apps. So I've already shown you how to configure those through the little configuration panel, and they're all a little bit different. Web App Builder doesn't so much allow you to configure the app. What it does is allow you to add widgets, and you can configure those widgets. It's a little different way, but Web App Builder is very, very popular and is a really good way. You can, if you want, download the source code for the configurable apps, but I don't typically recommend this. Why? Because once you download it, you have to, and modify it, you have to host it from your own servers, and then if we make an update or fix an issue, you have to download and replace all that. So typically I just say, stick with the configurable app, and you're good to go with that. It's much easier. We do have what are called solution apps, which are designed to support commonly used tasks in certain domains. So if I work for a city government, maybe one of the things I need to do is think about street conditions. So there's configurable apps in the local government solutions suite that you can download, or actually that you can use. They're hosted online like other configurable apps, but they're kind of more specialty focused on certain tasks within certain domains. All the rest of the configurable apps are kind of more generic, general purpose. The solution apps, the templates, are a little bit more focused, and you'll find them online. Here's one that is used for photo inventory. So a lot of tax assessors will go take a photo of a property and your taxes based on the condition of your property. So here's an app that supports that. All right, another type of app that you can use is a group gallery app. So when you put things in a group, you can use an app to present the contents of that group as well. So there's a couple of gallery apps that you can use. My favorite is the minimal gallery. You can also take groups and embed them using the HTML that's generated. Let's just take a look at that, since that might seem a little confusing. All right, so let's go to my groups, and let's find here's my raster and vector basemaps group. I'll just use this because it's handy. So here's how it looks in my group. But what I can do here is I can come up and I can click share. Now I can embed this as a ribbon in my gallery. The HTML is generated for me automatically. I copy and paste, drop it into my website, and I can choose, do I want a grid of 4 by 3 or 2 by 4 or just a row of 4, and I just copy and paste this. So that's one way to leverage group content. Another way is when I click share, I can create a web app, just like when you share a map. And the minimal gallery is a really nice gallery that provides a good user experience for presenting content that is all in one group, and then people can sort of browse through that content and decide what they want to open. And this supports even document types and things like that, not just maps or apps. And all of the options here can be configured, so it's a nice app, and just keep that in mind when you're presenting content from groups. All right. And moving along. Okay, so now we've got a great looking organization. We've thought about our thumbnails, we've added some content, we've used that save layer, made some really good building blocks, and now we're ready to go ahead and invite more people into our organization so that they can experience the wonders of ArcGIS online web mappings. Okay, so we want to invite them in and make them feel welcome, of course, just like a guest in your home. So there's a couple of ways that you can invite people into your organization. You can send them invitations using pre-established usernames. You can also go ahead and send them an invite, and they can establish their own username. You can do this from a file, from a text file. You can list everybody in a text file and do that, or you can use it one by one. Lots of larger organizations like to use their enterprise logins. So what this means is that when you go to work every day, you log in. And that same login, whatever your username and password is, can be how you log in or how you enable others to log into your ArcGIS online organization. In order for that to work, there's a couple of, it has to be a SAML-based authentication mechanism on your organization, but given that, you can use your same logins that you use every day as a login to your ArcGIS Online organization. So I think that's a really good thing to consider and a really good thing to do. So as an admin, as people join the organization, you can invite them in and immediately assign them a role. Publisher, author, viewer, and roles will change here shortly as well. You can also immediately assign them to groups so that when they log in, they already are members of certain groups, and you've done the right thing and already put stuff that's useful and interesting into those groups for them to use. So they have a great initial experience. As an admin, you can also do things like manage credit limits if you want. And a good practice is to ensure that users complete that profile so that when other people discover their content and they click on their name, that they see a nice profile that explains who they are or what their role is in your organization. And then, of course, as an admin, you can have a group of admins. You're responsible for curating the organization, not just the content, but everything else that's going on there. And we've, over time, increased our management tool capabilities to provide a better way for admins to see what's going on. We provide some basic roles, but as an admin, you can create custom roles. And you can use templates to do this, and you just check off or on the capabilities that you want others to have. Let's go back to my organization here. And so if I go to settings, one of the things I can do is I can create roles. Esri gives you three by default, and you can create additional ones. So here's one called GIS Data Administrator. Here's one called an Engineer. And the way that you create a custom role is you click Create Role, and you give it a name, and you give it a description, and then you select a template. So let's just say this person is going to be a data curator. So we've already established a template for data curation tasks, but what you can do is you can check on additional capabilities that you might want those people to have, or you can check off things that you don't want them to do. So custom roles are very useful, but I would also recommend, they're like seasoning. You don't want to add too much because you'll ruin the flavor of your food. And they're kind of a little bit hard to keep track of if you have lots and lots of them. So use custom roles sparingly, but they're also very useful in helping people or governing people in your organization and the tasks that they can perform. And I've got just a couple of minutes left, so let me just move on to a couple of topics here that are important. I've talked a little bit about user profiles. By default, a user profile is only visible within your organization. Why Esri does this, I don't know. Because what I want is anybody that can publish content publicly, I want their profile to be visible. Actually, I do know why we locked this down. It's because some of our federal government agencies didn't want their user profiles to be displayed publicly. So it was mostly in our defense community. So by default, a person in your organization, their profile is only visible within your organization, but they can share content publicly if you've enabled them to do that. So if they do that, you want to make sure that their profile is also visible, so you as an admin can go in and do that, or you can instruct the user to do that. In a profile, you're going to want to have a nice little thumbnail, complete name. This here is a bio, and you'll notice there's some funny characters there. Those are the those are the ASCII representations for carriage return and line feed. So we don't actually support that in that little widget, but you can add your own carriage returns and line feeds to kind of format things nicely. It's a little bit of an extra thing to do. I like to do it, but certainly not required or needed. But think about the profile visibility and encourage your members to complete a good profile as they join your organization. So here's an example of an OK profile, right? Sandy tells me who she is, who she works for, and I've got some contact information. Now, here's a great profile. I see Lindsay's picture. She seems like a charming and happy person, and she tells me a lot about who she is and what her role is at the Trust for Public Land. And this is also a good user profile. Stephanie Smith here is representing an organization. So rather than have a picture of herself, because she is representing the organization, she uses the organization logo in her profile. So a couple of different approaches, some interesting things for you to think about. Let me just skip on ahead here, since we have so little time left. And I just wanted to make sure I covered all the topics that I wanted to. I am going to skip open data for now, and we'll just kind of move on to the very last one, which is kind of curating your organization. So you as an admin, or maybe you have a collection of admins, you're responsible for keeping your organization healthy and active and vibrant, and over time we've created some really excellent tools which let you look at what's going on in your organization. So you can see which of your apps are the most popular, which of your members of your organization have done the most work and have been productive and active. And you can look at utilization. This is also where you manage licenses. So all this is part of your organization dashboard. So admins are the ones that see this, and other members of your organization do not. So these have improved vastly. You can also download some of this and use it in the context of spreadsheets and things like that. I'll skip this as well. GeoJob is a business partner. Actually, I'm not skipping it because I'm talking about it. GeoJob is a business partner, and they provide some free admin tools. And I like their admin tools, especially because they're free. They have some pro versions that you subscribe to, but lots of users in the United States use their free admin tools, and many users actually use their pro versions as well. So I just mentioned this as something that you might think about. You'll find that in the marketplace. A new product that we released 2 releases ago is called ArcGIS Companion, and it's kind of meant for administrators to be able to administer an organization, do common tasks from a phone or a tablet. So it's a little app, a native app that you use on your Android or iOS device, and then it provides you some tools that let you work within your organization and do some admin. And a tool that I mentioned earlier, this is technically unsupported but widely used, is something called, we just call it the Swiss Army knife for ArcGIS Online. It's really the ArcGIS Online Assistant. And you'll find that on GitHub. If you Google ArcGIS Online Assistant, you'll find it. And these are useful tools which are free and free for you to use, which also might help you in your admin tasks. So with that, I think I have to end my presentation. I'm out of time. If you'd like, I'll be out in the lobby as soon as I take down my laptop here. And if you have any questions or want to ask me about anything that you've heard here today, I'll be out in the lobby in just a minute or two. And thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for attending.